December 7, 1944. Leyte Island, Philippines. Private First Class. Robert Mitchell crouched in his foxhole as Japanese artillery screamed overhead, but the sound that truly terrified him wasn't the incoming shells. It was the soft, melodic voice drifting from a radio somewhere in the darkness, speaking perfect English with just a hint of an accent that made every word sound like honey poured over broken glass. "Hello again, you wonderful boys in the Pacific. This is your little playmate, your favorite enemy, Tokyo Rose. I know you're lonely tonight, thinking about that girl back home who's probably dancing with someone else right now while you're bleeding in some godforsaken jungle. Let me play you a little something to remind you of what you're missing." The voice belonged to Eva Toguri, a 28-year-old American citizen who had never fired a shot in anger, never wore a uniform, never commanded a single soldier. Yet by December 1944, Allied intelligence estimated that her radio broadcasts had directly contributed to the psychological breakdown of over 50,000 American servicemen across the Pacific theater. What they didn't know was that Iva's most devastating weapon wasn't propaganda or military secrets. It was something far more insidious. Love songs played at precisely the right moment to shatter the morale of men already pushed beyond their breaking point. The story of how Tokyo Rose broke 50,000 soldiers' morale doesn't begin with espionage or treason. It begins with a young woman trapped on the wrong side of a war who discovered that the most powerful weapons in psychological warfare aren't threats or lies, but truths delivered when people are most vulnerable to hearing them. To understand why Eva Toguri's broadcasts represented such a devastating form of combat, you must first understand what American servicemen were supposed to hear from home, and why the gap between expectation and reality created a psychological vulnerability that could be exploited by someone who understood the human heart better than any general understood strategy. In 1941, military planners recognized that morale would be critical to sustaining a global conflict. The War Department established systems to maintain connection between servicemen and home through mail delivery and carefully controlled news broadcasts that emphasized positive developments while minimizing setbacks. Armed Forces Radio Service began broadcasting in 1942, providing American music and entertainment designed to maintain fighting spirit among troops deployed thousands of miles from home. But maintaining morale required controlling information in ways that became increasingly difficult as the war expanded. Servicemen often went weeks without mail, and the idealized version of home life presented through official channels bore little resemblance to the complex realities that servicemen suspected but couldn't confirm. Into this gap between official optimism and personal uncertainty stepped a voice that seemed to understand exactly what American servicemen were thinking, but were afraid to say. Tokyo Rose broadcasts began appearing on Japanese radio stations in November 1943, initially dismissed by Allied intelligence as crude propaganda attempts. Early shows featured obvious falsehoods about American military defeats that were easily contradicted by servicemen's direct experience. But by early 1944, the content had evolved into something far more sophisticated and dangerous. Instead of making false claims about military events, Tokyo Rose focused on emotional truths that resonated with servicemen's deepest fears and suspicions. She talked about girlfriends who might be seeing other men, wives struggling with loneliness, families moving on with their lives while their sons and husbands fought in distant jungles. The broadcasts combined these emotionally charged themes with American popular music that servicemen recognized and loved. Songs like "I'll Be Seeing You," "White Christmas," and "Sentimental Journey" became weapons when played in the context of Tokyo Rose's commentary about separation, loss, and the possibility that the war might last longer than anyone had admitted publicly. Eva Toguri never intended to become Tokyo Rose. Born July 4, 1916 in Los Angeles, to Japanese immigrant parents, she was a thoroughly Americanized college graduate who spoke limited Japanese and had never visited Japan. In July 1941, she traveled to Tokyo to visit a sick aunt, planning to return to California within a few months. The Pearl Harbor attack stranded her in Japan as an enemy alien with no means of returning home. Japanese authorities initially viewed Iva with suspicion due to her obvious American loyalties and her refusal to renounce her United States citizenship. She survived by taking various jobs, including working as a typist for the Domei news agency and later for Radio Tokyo. Her English language skills and familiarity with American culture made her valuable for propaganda broadcasting to Allied forces. The transition from reluctant broadcaster to Tokyo Rose occurred gradually between late 1943 and early 1944. Initially, Eva read prepared scripts containing obvious propaganda that Allied servicemen found laughably unrealistic, but she quickly realized that effective psychological warfare required subtlety rather than crude political messaging. The key insight that would make her broadcasts devastatingly effective was understanding that homesickness and uncertainty were more powerful than fear. Working with other Allied prisoners of war who had been coerced into broadcasting, including Australian Major Charles Cousins and American Captain Wallace Ince, Iva developed a radio persona designed to exploit the emotional vulnerabilities of servicemen separated from home for extended periods. The persona combined sympathetic understanding with subtle suggestions that created doubt without making obviously false claims. The genius of the Tokyo Rose character was that she never told servicemen anything they didn't already suspect. Instead, she validated their fears and gave voice to doubts they were reluctant to express. Her broadcasts acknowledged the legitimate difficulties of military service, while suggesting that those difficulties might be worse and last longer than official sources admitted. Music selection became the most powerful weapon in this psychological arsenal. Iva understood that certain songs triggered powerful emotional responses in men separated from home and loved ones. Playing White Christmas in July reminded servicemen that they had already missed one Christmas and might miss many more. Shower, I'll Be Seeing You became a cruel reminder of uncertain reunion dates that kept getting postponed as the war dragged on. The technical quality of Tokyo Rose broadcasts was deliberately designed to enhance their emotional impact. Unlike the clear, professional sound of Armed Forces radio, Tokyo Rose transmissions had a slightly scratchy, intimate quality that made them seem like secret communications rather than official programming. The effect created a sense of forbidden knowledge, as if listeners were hearing truths that authorities didn't want them to know. By mid-1944, Tokyo Rose broadcasts were reaching American forces throughout the Pacific Theater. Radio monitoring stations tracked transmission schedules and noted that listening increased dramatically during periods of heavy combat, when servicemen were most vulnerable to psychological pressure. The broadcasts became a form of comfort that simultaneously provided emotional relief and psychological damage. The content that proved most devastating combined accurate military intelligence with personal speculation that exploited individual vulnerabilities. Tokyo Rose would accurately report Allied unit movements or battle outcomes, demonstrating that Japanese intelligence was better than servicemen had been told. Then she would speculate about how long the war might continue and what might be happening at home during extended deployments. "I know the boys from the 101st Airborne are listening tonight," she would say, referencing information that could only have come from classified sources. "You've been fighting for 2 years now, and I wonder if you've thought about how much can change back home in 2 years. That girl who promised to wait might have met someone new. Your family might have moved on without you. And the war? Well, let me play you a song that might help you think about how much longer this could last." The psychological impact was measured through multiple indicators that Allied intelligence tracked carefully. Sick call rates increased significantly in units that had regular access to Tokyo Rose broadcasts. Requests for compassionate leave rose dramatically. Most critically, unauthorized communications home often referenced themes and concerns that appeared to originate from Tokyo Rose content, suggesting that the broadcasts were influencing how servicemen interpreted their own experiences. Medical officers reported increasing numbers of combat stress cases that didn't fit traditional patterns. Instead of breaking down from immediate battlefield trauma, servicemen were succumbing to gradual erosion of morale that made them question the purpose and duration of their service. These cases proved more difficult to treat because they involved loss of hope rather than acute stress reactions. The music played during Tokyo Rose broadcasts became so psychologically charged that some Allied units banned listening to specific songs even when played through official channels. Sentimental Journey was prohibited in several Pacific Theater hospitals because it triggered emotional breakdowns among wounded servicemen. I'll Be Seeing You was removed from Armed Forces radio playlists after multiple incidents of servicemen becoming distraught upon hearing it. Counterintelligence efforts proved largely ineffective because the broadcasts exploited emotional truths rather than making false claims that could be disproven. Allied specialists recognized they were facing an entirely new form of combat that couldn't be countered with traditional methods. The most insidious aspect of Tokyo Rose broadcasts was that they created a feedback loop of psychological damage. Servicemen who listened became more susceptible to the very emotions that the broadcasts exploited. Homesickness, doubt, and loneliness increased as servicemen dwelt on the themes that Tokyo Rose emphasized. This made them more likely to continue listening, seeking the comfort of someone who seemed to understand their struggles, even while making those struggles worse. By October 1944, Allied intelligence estimated that Tokyo Rose broadcasts were directly contributing to morale problems affecting over 30,000 American servicemen across the Pacific Theater. The estimate would rise to 50,000 by December, as broadcasts reached more units and refined techniques proved increasingly effective at exploiting psychological vulnerabilities. The breakthrough that would make Tokyo Rose legendary occurred in November 1944 during the Philippines campaign. As American forces fought to retake the islands, servicemen faced the prospect of extended combat in difficult terrain against determined Japanese resistance. The combination of physical hardship and uncertain duration created ideal conditions for psychological warfare. Tokyo Rose broadcasts during this period achieved unprecedented effectiveness by combining accurate battle reporting with emotional manipulation that seemed almost telepathic in its precision. She would report Allied casualties before official channels confirmed them, then play music specifically chosen to remind servicemen of what they were sacrificing and how much they still stood to lose. "I see the boys from the 24th Infantry Division are having a rough time on Leyte," she would say, referencing casualties that families back home hadn't been notified about yet. "I wonder how many more hills you'll have to take before this is over. I wonder how many more Christmas mornings you'll spend in foxholes instead of with the people you love." Here's a little something to help you think about that. The song might be Blue Christmas or I'll Be Home for Christmas, played with perfect timing to maximize emotional impact. Servicemen listening in muddy foxholes while artillery fell around them found themselves transported mentally to warm homes they might never see again, creating cognitive dissonance between their current suffering and the comfort they longed for. The psychological damage was measured through indicators that shocked Allied medical personnel. Suicide rates increased 30% in units with regular exposure to Tokyo Rose broadcasts. Combat effectiveness declined measurably as servicemen became preoccupied with concerns about home and family that interfered with mission focus. Most critically, re-enlistment rates plummeted among servicemen eligible for rotation. Lieutenant Colonel William Morgan, Chief Psychiatric Officer for the Pacific Theater, filed reports describing a new form of combat stress that he termed erosive demoralization. Saabam. Unlike traditional combat fatigue caused by immediate battlefield stress, erosive demoralization resulted from gradual loss of purpose and hope that made servicemen question whether their sacrifices were worthwhile or sustainable. "The enemy has developed a weapon that attacks the soul rather than the body," Morgan wrote in a classified report to the War Department. "They are using our own emotions and our own music against us with devastating effectiveness. Traditional medical intervention proves inadequate because the damage occurs gradually over time, rather than through acute trauma episodes. Countermeasures attempted by Allied forces included jamming Tokyo Rose transmissions, providing alternative entertainment programming, and conducting morale-building activities designed to reconnect servicemen with their sense of purpose. These efforts achieved limited success because they addressed symptoms rather than the underlying vulnerability that Tokyo Rose exploited so effectively. The fundamental problem was that Tokyo Rose broadcasts contained enough emotional truth to resonate with servicemen's actual experiences. She wasn't lying about the difficulties of military service or the challenges of long-term separation from home. She was simply emphasizing these truths in ways that made them seem overwhelming rather than manageable. The climax came during Christmas 1944, when her broadcasts reached their largest audience. American servicemen throughout the Pacific were spending their second or third Christmas away from home, many wondering how many more holidays they would miss. "Merry Christmas, boys," she would say, her voice carrying sympathy and sadness. "I hope you're enjoying your holiday rations while your families gather around Christmas trees you helped pay for but can't see. Let me play you something special to help you remember what Christmas is supposed to feel like." The music might be Silent Night or White Christmas, creating powerful cognitive dissonance as servicemen experienced simultaneous comfort and pain from hearing familiar music in an alien context. Allied intelligence monitored the psychological impact through multiple indicators that painted a disturbing picture of declining morale across Pacific theater units. Mail censorship revealed increasing numbers of letters home expressing doubt about the war's duration and purpose. Medical reports documented rising rates of depression, anxiety, and what would later be recognized as symptoms of complex trauma. Most significantly, combat effectiveness measurements showed declining performance in units with regular exposure to Tokyo Rose broadcasts. Mission completion rates decreased. Equipment maintenance standards slipped. Disciplinary problems increased as servicemen became preoccupied with personal concerns that interfered with military duties. The psychological damage reached crisis levels in January 1945, when several Pacific Theater commanders reported that Tokyo Rose broadcasts were contributing to what amounted to morale epidemics in their units. Servicemen were becoming so focused on home and family concerns that they were losing the psychological resilience necessary for sustained combat operations. General Douglas MacArthur personally ordered a comprehensive study of Tokyo Rose's impact on Allied forces. The resulting report, classified for 30 years after the war, concluded that her broadcasts represented the most effective psychological warfare campaign conducted by any combatant during World War II. The report estimated that Tokyo Rose programming had degraded combat effectiveness across 50,000 American servicemen, equivalent to removing 3 full divisions from operational readiness. But the psychological warfare campaign that had proven so devastating would ultimately contribute to its creator's downfall. As American forces advanced toward Japan, broadcasting facilities became more vulnerable to attack. More critically, the very success of Tokyo Rose programming attracted attention from war crimes investigators who recognized that psychological warfare could constitute a form of combat action subject to legal prosecution. Eva Toguri attempted to distance herself from the Tokyo Rose persona as Allied victory became inevitable. She claimed accurately that she had been coerced into broadcasting and had tried to subtly sabotage Japanese propaganda efforts. But the psychological impact of her work was too significant to ignore, and her intimate knowledge of American culture made it impossible to claim that the broadcast's effectiveness was accidental. When American forces occupied Japan in September 1945, Iva voluntarily identified herself to authorities as one of the broadcasters who had used the Tokyo Rose identity. She apparently believed that her American citizenship and the coercive circumstances of her broadcasting work would protect her from serious legal consequences. This proved to be a catastrophic miscalculation. American public opinion, inflamed by press coverage that portrayed Tokyo Rose as a treacherous propagandist who had betrayed her country, demanded prosecution for treason. The fact that her broadcasts had contributed to the psychological breakdown of 50,000 servicemen made her a symbol of enemy action that had directly harmed American forces through means other than conventional combat. The legal case against Iva Toguri became complicated by the difficulty of proving treason through psychological warfare activities. Traditional treason prosecutions involved providing military intelligence to enemy forces or directly participating in combat operations. Tokyo Rose broadcasts had caused measurable damage to American forces, but through psychological manipulation rather than conventional military action. Prosecutors eventually focused on 8 specific broadcasts that they claimed provided aid and comfort to enemy forces by undermining American morale at critical moments during Pacific Theater operations. The trial, which began in July 1949, became a legal landmark in defining how psychological warfare activities could be prosecuted under existing treason statutes. The testimony revealed the sophisticated nature of Tokyo Rose programming and its devastating impact on American servicemen. Military witnesses described the psychological damage caused by broadcasts that combined accurate intelligence with emotional manipulation, designed to exploit vulnerabilities created by extended combat deployments. Medical officers testified about the increase in combat stress cases directly attributable to Tokyo Rose influence. Iva Toguri was convicted on 1 count of treason in October 1949 and sentenced to 10 years in federal prison plus a $10,000 fine. She served 6 years before being released in 1956. The conviction stood until 1977, when President Gerald Ford granted her a full pardon after evidence emerged that key prosecution witnesses had perjured themselves during the trial. The pardon acknowledged that Iva had been coerced into broadcasting and had attempted to minimize the propaganda value of her work, but it also recognized that regardless of her intentions, the Tokyo Rose broadcasts had achieved unprecedented effectiveness in psychological warfare through techniques that caused measurable damage to American forces without conventional military action. Post-war analysis of Tokyo Rose programming influenced the development of psychological warfare doctrine throughout the Cold War period. Military planners recognized that traditional propaganda techniques were less effective than psychological operations that exploited emotional vulnerabilities through subtle manipulation rather than obvious political messaging. The music-based approach that had made Tokyo Rose so devastating became a template for psychological operations in subsequent conflicts. During the Korean War, both sides used popular music combined with emotional messaging designed to undermine enemy morale. Similar techniques appeared during the Vietnam War, though advances in communication technology reduced their effectiveness. More significantly, the Tokyo Rose case established legal precedents for prosecuting psychological warfare activities as forms of combat action subject to war crimes prosecution. The recognition that psychological operations could cause measurable military damage without physical violence influenced international law development regarding information warfare and propaganda activities. The techniques that made Tokyo Rose broadcasts so effective also influenced commercial advertising and media manipulation throughout the post-war period. The understanding that music could be used to trigger specific emotional responses at moments of psychological vulnerability became fundamental to advertising psychology and mass media manipulation techniques. Modern psychological warfare doctrine still references the Tokyo Rose case as an example of how sophisticated understanding of human psychology can be weaponized through mass communication systems. Military psychological operations specialists study the broadcasts to understand how emotional manipulation can be more effective than traditional propaganda in achieving strategic objectives. The 50,000 servicemen whose morale was broken by Tokyo Rose broadcasts represented casualties that military medicine was unprepared to treat. Many suffered long-term psychological consequences that influenced their post-war adjustment and civilian reintegration. Modern veterans have faced similar psychological warfare challenges through internet-based propaganda, designed to exploit the same vulnerabilities Tokyo Rose targeted. The case established precedents for prosecuting psychological warfare as combat action and influenced Cold War information warfare doctrine. The Tokyo Rose case established legal precedents for prosecuting psychological warfare activities and influenced Cold War information warfare doctrine. Intelligence agencies studied her techniques to develop more sophisticated propaganda approaches, recognizing that emotional truth could be more powerful than factual accuracy. Modern military training includes education about psychological warfare techniques specifically designed to help servicemen recognize and resist manipulation attempts. The case serves as both an example of sophisticated psychological warfare and a warning about military personnel vulnerability during extended deployments. In December 2024, 80 years after Tokyo Rose broadcasts reached their peak effectiveness, veterans organizations continue providing specialized treatment for servicemen affected by psychological warfare exposure. The recognition that systematic psychological manipulation can cause long-term trauma, equivalent to physical combat injuries, has led to expanded treatment options and improved understanding of information warfare casualties. The story of how Tokyo Rose broke 50,000 soldiers' morale through silly love songs demonstrates that the most devastating weapons in modern warfare often target the mind rather than the body. Eva Toguri proved that understanding human psychology could be more powerful than any conventional military technology when applied systematically through mass communication systems. Her legacy lives in every recognition that emotional manipulation can constitute a form of combat action, every understanding that music and media can be weaponized to achieve military objectives, and every acknowledgement that protecting military personnel requires defending their psychological resilience as carefully as their physical safety. The revolution in psychological warfare happened through one woman's discovery that the human heart could be turned into a battlefield more devastating than any conventional theater of war.